This story is from Reddit user as above, so below 75. The dead guy's phone. This isn't scary like a ghost story, but it is 100% true. In the early 2000s, my best friend and I spent all of our free time racing dirt bikes, finding new practice riding spots. This particular day was super hot and humid, so we headed to a new spot that we heard about, which had a long established track but was totally illegal and right outside of New York City. We were there for a while, and the place became packed with other riders. Normally this would be great, but these dudes were doing their own things, and no one was following the track direction. A recipe for disaster. The entire time we're there, we keep hearing a cell phone ringing. Like that old Nokia ring, it would ring 3 to 4 times stop, and a few minutes later start ringing again. At this point, things are getting pretty dangerous on that track. My friend winds up in a fast head-on crash with a quad. This, of course, quickly escalates into a full-on physical fight, so I step in and calm things down. The whole time that phone is ringing, only now it sounds very close. My friend is hurting and bleeding pretty bad now, and will definitely need to go to the hospital. So I go over to collect his bike and scattered parts and pads from where he crashed. All the while that phone is ringing, but really, really close now. As I reach for his broken visor in the brush, I smell it. The unmistakable death smell. I'm thinking maybe a dead animal. Then I see the soles of dress shoes, still connected to legs, and black dress pants. That was enough. At that point, I knew where that ringing was coming from. I left everything right there but his mangled bike, and we quickly got out of there. Meanwhile, my friend is like, "You left all of my shit there." I'm like, "Bro, there's a dead guy in the bushes. If you want your shit, go get it yourself, I'll wait." He understood, and we wound up making an anonymous call to 911 to report it. A few days later, I read that the body that was recovered belonged to a mob guy and that his family reported him missing a few days prior. The article went on to say that that area was a notorious dumping ground for gangsters and malfeasance and was slated to soon be developed. Needless to say, we never went back. This story is from Reddit user Burstbeat, The Field and the Deer. This story happened 20 years ago, and I have not lived in the area for much of that time, so this is not current personal info. But I think that the location is relevant to the creepy feelings, and, of course, I encourage others to look up the references I bring up. I grew up on Long Island, New York. Many Long Island town names are Native American based, and I've heard they're pretty wild to pronounce for those who did not grow up there. Hopog, Patchogue, Copiag, Massapequa. Only 2 of those rhyme. Not sorry for any of the other names I mention here. Long Island is already home to creepy stories such as the Amityville Horror House. I have countless stories of myself or friends, family, checking out historic places back then, such as shut-down asylums, haunted railway or highway crossings, Mary's grave, etc. And then, of course, there were random disappearances, some of which ended up being the Long Island Ripper, a case which recently got an alleged perpetrator. I didn't realize this at the time of this story, but the place my friends and I went to was in the same category as all of these unsettling things. To be clear, I have no idea if this was supernatural or not, but the history I'll later explain creeps me out either way. Every St. Patrick's Day, my mother, her friends, their kids, and any of my friends who wanted to tag along would go out to Montauk for the big parade. Montauk is gorgeous BTW, and the sunset is allegedly famous. One of my mother's friends owned a room in another famous attraction, the Montauk Manor, and we all went to visit after a long day of shenanigans. My friends and I, being teenagers, still had energy to spare, so we asked if we could rent tennis rackets, and just play around on the completely empty court. There were 4 of us, so we just played 2 versus 2 of whack the ball as hard as we could at each other. Most of the balls went over the massive chain link fences because of our ridiculousness, and I didn't want my mother's friend to get in trouble for us losing the balls, so I asked my friends to split up and collect them all. I think we had a batch of a specific number, maybe 10 or 20, so we knew how many to look for. I took the neighboring field and grumbled in teenage angst about why there would be a tall, wheat yellow grass field right next to a tennis court, with a 10-foot tall fence, mind. I managed to find a lot of the balls we were looking for right on the edge of the tall grass, so I tossed them behind me onto the asphalt and figured a bunch probably rolled into the field itself. So I went onto this neighboring property to look. I was alone, and I can't explain this any better, but I felt compelled to look up from my ground search and look out to the field. There was a large rock, unsure if it counted as a boulder, that stuck out from the 5-foot-tall plus grass, right in the middle of the field, maybe 100 to 200 feet away, and although I'd seen it before, I was stunned to see a figure sitting on top of this rock. I can see this in my mind's eye to this day. It was a very lanky figure, presumably male from the short hair, and either wearing a very tight shirt or nothing on top. Whatever the bottoms were looked like some sort of skirt or kilt-looking item that stopped around the knees. I can't describe much more because the figure was unnaturally dark, as if no light penetrated this strange silhouette, while the sun was still very much up and sheen it on both of us. I didn't register the darkness at first because the second I looked up and my eyes locked onto this person, the figure quickly slid off of the rock and I saw the tall grass shaking towards my direction. My immediate thought was, oh shit, that's the farmer's son, and I shouldn't be in this field. So I turned to make a quick exit. I went into the field on a diagonal, so when I turned it was a new path out as I tried to escape any potential consequences. And on the short route back, I skidded to a halt at an extremely disturbing sight. In a gap in the tall grass was a dead deer, and right next to it a very old-looking tennis ball, likely not one of ours. The sight made me freeze, and in the moment, I did a quick scan to try to understand what I was seeing. I eventually focused on something I couldn't explain in the moment. There was a hole in its chest, right between the front legs, but there was no blood or smell or flies. This is where I lost whatever cool I had and started screaming to my friends to go, "Run, we need to get out of here." The panic in my voice apparently convinced them very quickly. Back at the manor door, I explained what I saw. They were questioning why I screamed at them, especially when I insisted that we look for the tennis balls, but after explaining the deer, they were pale and silent, chalking it up to teenage energy plus stupidity, and probably myself still running on adrenaline. My friends eventually said they needed to see this deer, and I agreed to show them the area I was in. I told them we can try to find it again, but someone saw me on the property, so we shouldn't trespass or anything. After a good couple of minutes to calm down, we went back over and were still on the manor's asphalt, paving, just peering around to see if we could spot the deer through the grass. My friend actually did, and we find out that it was one row away and easily visible if we used our arms to push some grass aside. I looked up again, not compelled but probably paranoid, to look at the rock and to make sure the only grass that was moving was due to the wind. Then we stepped back into the field to get a good look at this thing. We were all creeped out by the lack of blood despite a cavernous hole being there. There just wasn't any evidence of violence at all. There was nothing on the ground or around this hole on the fur, just a dark, empty space where fur and other things like tissue should be. After a couple of quiet minutes, someone said, "I honestly can't remember if it was me or my friends. That's where the heart would be." I remember a coldness going over me then, and suddenly I was no longer interested in what happened here. It felt to me like everyone got this feeling, and while there was a, now funny to me, morbid question of, should we grab the tennis ball? We all left without another word to each other. After the shock wore off and we were walking through the manor and back to my mother's friend's room, we talked about how crazy that is. But that was the last we spoke of it. Until I Googled Long Island haunted places one day, years later. I don't remember the reasoning now, but knowing me, I was probably looking for a cool place to drive to that night. On the site, the Montauk Manor was listed, and that cold feeling washed over me again. I read about how the place was built upon countless Native American graves, how rituals were often done on the old and new grounds, and how shadow people were seen in the manor's hallways. We didn't see the latter, but the rest of it made me question a lot of what I saw that cold March day. I immediately messaged two of the friends who went with me with, "Do you remember that time?" And they were absolutely baffled at the news, which was validating for me. It's become a cool niche legend for us, but at the same time, none of us have ever gone back. This story is from Reddit user Obligation Salt. My ghost story. So I'm 21 now, and this story took place when I was a freshman in high school, so around 16 years old. My family and I never talk about what happened for some reason. I guess it's just a thing of the past. Anyway, I was in my room, and my parents were in theirs sleeping. Note, we live in a pretty big house. They sleep on the second floor, and it's pretty far from my room. It was around 12, and I was just doing what every high schooler does, stay up on my phone and Snapchat friends, watch YouTube, etc. I was laying in bed, and I heard 3 very quiet light taps on my only outside window. Then I swear 3 knocks on the window so loud I thought the glass was going to break. It literally shook the house. At first I thought maybe it was one of my older friends trying to mess with me, but was also in the state of shock where you can't move. My parents came downstairs pissed off, asking what the hell that was. I told them exactly what went down and how I thought it was from someone outside. Now here's the freakiest part of my story. I live in Colorado, and this happened a few days after a snowstorm, maybe around 4 inches of snow on the ground all around the house. My dad went outside to check for footprints and couldn't find anything even close to my window. Nothing like this ever happened again. I did move rooms a year or 2 after this experience. I believe my parents think I did it for attention or something, but I know it was something else. I personally believe in spirits and demons, and that's what I'm leaning towards still. Whatever it was, fucking scared me and was loud as shit. This story is from Reddit user Pink, 1375. I think I saw a skinwalker. About 2 months ago, my husband, 34 male, and I, 29 female, were staying in a camper on a friend's property in northern Wisconsin. One night I wasn't feeling very well, so I went and laid down in the camper and promptly fell asleep. A few hours later, around 3 a.m., I suddenly woke up and bolted out the door and started projectile vomiting outside by the window. My husband called out and asked if I was okay. I managed to say yeah in between rounds. When I finally finished and felt like I was okay to go back and lay down, I spit a few more times to get rid of the taste, and as I looked up, there was a face about 3 feet in front of me in the darkness. I stared at it, and it at me. I was petrified. I couldn't move, but I was also afraid to take my eyes off of it. I slowly started to move my head up, down, and side to side to try and get a better angle or a closer look, and as I did so, it began to mimic my movements. There we were in the darkness of the forest, bobbing up, down, back, forth, slowly leaning closer and closer to one another as we tried to figure each other out. I stared straight into its cold, hollow eyes. I couldn't look away in fear of what would happen if I did. It stared back at me, almost as if it didn't know what I was either. It was too dark to make out any features, but the face had the shape of a human face, but what I could see on the body from behind the truck just looked hunched over and distorted. We stayed that way for what felt like forever, until I finally managed to call out, "Babe." "Yeah?" my husband responded. "There is something out here," I said, only slightly raising my voice. "What?" he asked. "I don't know. Some kind of animal? I'm not sure, but I'm afraid to move." "It's just watching me," I whispered almost to myself. He opened the door of the camper and looked out into the darkness. "Where?" he asked, unable to see what I was seeing. "It's right in front of me, just watching," I told him, bewildered that he couldn't see it. He grabbed a flashlight and shined it in front of me, and it was gone. There was nothing there. I never saw it leave. I kept its cold, dead gaze the whole time. How could it not be there? I am still very confused by this interaction. I know it was there. I saw it. It wasn't a dream, and I know I wasn't hallucinating. Can anybody tell me what they think it was? Edit. Just to respond to a few comments. I don't drink and I don't do drugs, so I was not inebriated. I don't remember all the details because I couldn't see very well, but here's what I got. I couldn't tell how tall it was, because from what I could see it looked hunched over and disfigured. I don't think it had any fur. It was pale in color, but again it was dark, so I'm not sure what color it was. It had big, black, soulless eyes, like looking straight into a void. It had sharp, jagged teeth, and I don't remember a nose at all. Hope this description helps. Maybe it wasn't a skinwalker because I guess they don't leave the Navajo land, but it was really scary. I should also mention that where I was in the woods of Wisconsin was not too far from the Hannahville Indian Reservation in Menominee County, Michigan, but again, not Navajo, so I'm not sure what it was. This story is from Reddit user Georgina X. Lost cross necklace appearing loudly in the night. I want to firstly say, I am not a 100% believer in the paranormal, so the fact that I feel very spooked right now is giving me goosebumps. While getting ready for New Year's night, my boyfriend wasn't able to find his long cross necklace, which was silver and on a chain. So we left the house without it and put it down to being lost. Today I cleaned the entire house, upstairs and down. It didn't show up anywhere in the process and the house was very neat now. We are both currently laying in bed together with the TV on and bedroom door closed. When we heard a loud noise from downstairs in the kitchen, the sound of glass bottles clanging together as if pouring them into another container. Shocked by this, my boyfriend jumped up and headed downstairs. He called up to me, "Come downstairs right now." So I did. From the middle of the stairs, I could see he was stood still staring down at his lost necklace lying right at the bottom of the stairs. We stood in silence, staring at it for a few minutes. There is literally nowhere that the necklace could have fell from or anything similar. We live alone and it's almost midnight here. I have a horrible feeling of dread and finding it quite scary. Could it be paranormal? This story is from Reddit user MedicalInevitable99. About 10 years ago, I had a dream that still gives me the chills every single time I think about it. Important backstory information. A friend of mine passed away when he was 19 from a sudden illness. His name was Kevin. A few years after he passed, my boyfriend and I moved in with a friend who is Kevin's best friend. We shared a one-bedroom apartment and had both our beds in the same room. Rent is expensive in your early 20s, okay? One night I was asleep and dreaming. I can't remember the beginning of it, but my dream suddenly changed. It got really bright, and I was walking up a set of stairs leading to an apartment door. I opened the door, and there was Kevin sitting on the couch in the living room of this brightly lit apartment. I said hi to him and sat down on the other couch facing him. He said hi back, smiling. I started asking him how he was, and that we all miss him. He said he was great, and that he missed us too, that he's keeping an eye on us from where he is. Anytime I asked him about where he was, he would say he can't talk about it, or he'd have to leave. I said we don't have to talk about it. He said we shouldn't be sad about his sudden passing, and to live our lives and be happy, love one another, things like that. After a couple minutes, I suddenly woke up. It's the middle of the night. I looked around the room. My boyfriend was snoring away and my roommate was asleep in his bed. I tried to go back to sleep but couldn't shake the feeling that Kevin was somehow still in the room, as if something was watching me. The dream just felt way too real. While looking around the room, I said "Kevin" out loud in almost a whisper. My roommate's head lifted off of his pillow suddenly and he turned around to face me. He said, "Did you just say Kevin?" I responded with something like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I just had a strange dream about him." He froze, then said, "I just had a dream about him too." I asked him what happened in his dream. We had the same dream, at the exact same time. Story is from Reddit user EnoughEmu2573. I don't think I'm alone. For a bit of context, I have lived with my mother and younger sister all my life, as well as my grandmother who passed away a few years ago. The house we live in has been around for nearly 100 years, and the only traumatic event was that the family's baby before us sadly passed away in the bedroom that's mine. For around a year now, I am mostly alone in the house as my sister is always out and my mother at her job. However, around a year ago, things started happening that I couldn't explain. Every other day, things go missing, and I find them in weird places. Things such as jewelry, money, etc. Then it's photographs and other random items. Not only that, when I'm in bed at night, I can hear unknown voices on the landing. but nobody else in the house hears them. When I'm alone, it gets worse. It feels like I'm constantly being stared at, from behind the door, by the window, and even right behind me. There has been times where I've seen tall figures by the door, especially in the evenings, then followed by lots of shuffling and random noise. At first I was really scared, but now I'm not sure whether to be afraid or calm. The reason I'm writing this is due to the other day. I was home alone as usual when I heard the bathroom light switch on. After checking and seeing nobody, I turned it off again, only to be greeted by a quick shadowy figure turn into the living room and turn on the light. I've seen figures a lot, but this by far has creeped me the fuck out. Am I crazy? Or is it someone from my family playing tricks on me? I don't know. This story is from Reddit user FinancialCheek1624. I had a strange encounter in the woods. To this day, I have no idea what it was. One night, me and my friend Sam decided to go smoke somewhere. I get into his beat-up Ford and we set off. I lived in Vermont where there were plenty of turnoffs and hidden smoke spots you just had to look for to find. So this night, Sam and I were bored, and we decided to go find a new smoke spot. It was one of those nights you could already tell we were going to be going out until at least 3 a.m. type of nights. Luckily, I had told my parents that I was staying at his house that night, and his mom wasn't really around much and didn't care what time we got back. We left his house around 10:30, went to the local dealer, picked up some bud, and started driving down the usual back roads that we've lived on our whole life. We start taking random turns just to go on some roads we haven't been on yet. And after a while, we still weren't making any progress. We were still in high school, so any sign of life or the possibility of a spot having a cop freaked us out and narrowed down our options quite a bit. Eventually, we found ourselves quite literally in the middle of nowhere, just driving down winding back roads. I see what looks like a spot with some potential, a turnoff with no sign or marking of any kind. We turn up the road in his beat-up white Ford and head up what appears to be an access road to some power lines. After a while of driving up this access road, which was just 2 tire tracks separated by some grass, we get to the top, and there's a small clearing and a makeshift parking lot where some service vehicles are able to have access to the power lines. We set up in the front seat with the car on and headlights still on, pointed at the forest, while we hit a few bowls from the tube. After a little time, there was a lull in the conversation, and we were both just kind of baked as hell looking at the forest in front of us that the headlights have lit up. Suddenly, Sam sits up from his seat and asks me, "Is that a deer?" I sit up in the front seat and look out the window to what he is pointing at. From where I was sitting, it looked like a deer resting in the gravel, but it was sitting almost unnaturally. Sam threw the car into gear and pulled up along next to it. We both got out, turned the car off, and pulled out our phone flashlights. We walk over next to it. We realize it is a deer, but not all of it. It was the head and the skin, but there was no meat on it or any blood, just the head attached to the skin. We both kind of just started saying to each other things like, "What the fuck?" as we looked at it for a bit. "Why would a hunter fully clean a deer and just leave the head and the skin?" I said, a little off-put. All of a sudden, "I don't know, man," he says as he picks up a stick. He flips it over and some strange symbol is carved into the other side of it. It looked almost like a plus sign, except all of the lines were curved, and it was embellished with some strange accent marks. We didn't think to take a picture of it, but in hindsight, we probably should have. Almost right after this, we hear noises coming from down along the power lines. For those of you who don't know, when big power lines are running through the forest, they clear all of the forest under it, which leaves a narrow strip of clearing stretching the length of the power lines. The access road was on a ridge line of sorts, and the power line ran perpendicular to the ridge, so we could see all the way down the hill into the valley, and then up the other side through the narrow strip of clearing where there weren't any trees. Right after we heard the noises, we turned our flashlights off, since both of us assumed that it was some service workers about to bust us, since who the hell else would be up here? We both stopped and listened to the sounds for a second. They were pretty distant, so we moved to the edge of the gravel lot to where we could hear them better. We hear the noises getting louder. It sounds like a bunch of people breaking sticks, and all of a sudden we see 20-25 people burst out of the tree line about 100 yards down from us, full-on sprinting from tree line to tree line across the clearing. The starlight was bright enough to where I could make out that the men were wearing all black Amish-looking clothing, but without the hats, and the women were wearing all white dresses, holding them above their knees, sprinting across the clearing. We had no idea why they were running, but almost instantaneously me and Sam had the same idea. We both made a beeline for his car, and Sam peeled out of the gravel parking spot and headed back down the access road. The entire time in the passenger seat, I'm just saying, what the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? We both just start laughing at the insanity of what we just saw. At this point, we must be doing 60 down this barely marked road when out of nowhere in a split second I see two shining dots in front of us, then huge yellow eyes, and then this massive silhouette that fills the whole windshield, and then bang. We both audibly screamed and my balls went so far up into my body. Sam slammed on the brakes and screamed, "Was that a fucking owl?" I just remember screaming, "We are not fucking stopping. Go, 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 go." We make it back onto the main road and then back to his house at around 2:30 a.m. and smoke some more and just talk about what the fuck we just saw. To this day, we still talk about it, and neither of us knows what we saw. Were those people running towards something or away from something? No idea. Although it doesn't really make much sense, we both feel like the owl was related to what we saw. We just don't know how. This story is from Reddit user Chilling Nightmares. Assassins. In high school, we had a kid named George. George and I weren't particularly close, but we had friends in common, so we did socialize together. He was a prominent debate team member, and I was more physical with the tennis and ski club. George, in my opinion, was always a little off. I think he had some kind of learning disability, so he was socially awkward. In our sophomore year, he was doing okay and was dating a nice girl in our class. She was a friend of mine, so that kept George and me somewhat in touch. But in our junior year, George failed almost every class and dropped out. After that, I didn't hear much about him. Someone told me they thought he tried to get his GED but failed. Time passed and I graduated. The summer after graduation, out of the blue, George calls me and invites me to go on a camping trip. It was a surprise since I hadn't seen or heard from him for over a year. He and a buddy I didn't know wanted me to join them. He said it would be a lot of fun. He knew of a great campsite that was a 3-hour hike to a secluded spot that was pretty awesome. He spoke about how great this would be, and I could bond with him and his friend, and we could become the Three Musketeers. As he tried to sell me on going with him, I got that weird feeling in my gut. Be polite and just say goodbye. I haven't seen George in a year, and he is talking to me like we are best friends. I thanked George for thinking of me and politely declined his invitation. 2 months later, I saw a picture of George on the news channel. He and an accomplice had killed a local politician. According to the news report, it was a murder-for-hire job. George and the accomplice went on the run out of state, where they were captured by a SWAT team. At his trial, George confessed that he and his friend had planned on becoming professional hitmen and advertised on Craigslist, where they were hired to assassinate the politician. I recognized the name of his friend as the same guy who had been on the camping trip last summer. It was the same person George recruited to become a professional assassin. I believe that they invited me on the camping trip to that secluded and isolated location to murder me as practice in the killing. This story is from Reddit user SavageBuddha00. In the depths of darkness, where fear takes hold and the mind plays tricks, there exists a tale of a chilling encounter that would haunt even the bravest of souls, and an experience that would shatter the psyche of any mortal. That tale was my own. I share it with you now, having spent countless hours reading the same tales in this forum, and hope someone will be able to help. My name is Adam, and have lived in Central Arkansas pretty much my whole life. I feel no need to change this information. Rather, if you don't hear from me again, then I guess you could call this my last testament. This took place almost a month ago to the day. I had just gotten home from spending some time with my little brother and my nephew. I had always believed in the paranormal as well as being deeply spiritual, having studied every kind of spiritual teaching I could from all parts of the world, though I had never experienced anything of this magnitude. I have stayed with my grandmother ever since my grandfather and uncle both passed away. I know some people have mixed thoughts about that, but I couldn't care less. I pulled in front of the house and got out, my grandmother's minivan sitting under the awning where it always sits. Walking up to the door was the first time I got the feeling something wasn't right. There were no lights on inside. Normally, at least the living room was lit up with my grandmother sitting in her chair watching TV. Maybe she was in the shower, I thought as I made my way inside. As soon as I stepped inside, that thought was pushed to the very back of my mind. Every light was off. It was cold, but not just a chill. This is the kind of cold you only find in desolate, empty, and dangerous places. A cold I had never felt before, and hope never to again. Alone in the house, I ascended the stairs, unaware of the terror that awaited. As I reached the top, my heart skipped a beat. At the end of the hall stood a towering figure, cloaked in shadow. Frozen in place, my mind raced, unable to understand the sight before me. The shadow figure, with an eerie grace, began to move closer, its form becoming clearer with each step. Panic gripped me tightly, my fight or flight non-existent. What in the actual fuck, like seriously? All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as a fear I had never known coursed through my being, threatening to consume my sanity. A bone-chilling whisper filled the air, echoing through the desolate house. The voice seemed to emanate from the depths of the shadow figure itself, weaving its way into my mind with sinister intent. Its words were incomprehensible, a twisted melange of ancient tongues, clicks, and hissing that sent shivers down my spine. As the figure drew nearer, its features slowly materialized, revealing a gaunt and twisted visage. Its eyes, devoid of any humanity, gleamed an icy shade of blue, piercing through the darkness with an otherworldly glow. Jagged, elongated fingers extended from its spindly limbs, reaching out for me longingly. An almost visible aura surrounded the figure, exuding malefic energy that corrupted the very air I struggled to breathe. It was as if the very essence of evil had taken form, its presence suffusing the environment, suffocating any hope that remained. I desperately longed to escape, to flee from this nightmare, but my body remained rooted to the spot as if bound by an unseen force. Fuck this. This can't be real, I thought. I know this shit happens, but not to someone like me. All thought abandoned me, replaced by a primal instinct to survive. I pleaded to the universe, to any divine entity that would listen, praying for deliverance from this unspeakable horror. But my pleas fell on deaf ears as the figure closed in. Suddenly, silence was deafeningly loud in my ears. A gust of wind swept across the hallway, slamming the still open front door and extinguishing the feeble light that had permeated the area. Darkness cradled me, wrapping around my body like a tangible entity. In the abyss, I could sense the figure's impending presence, its loathsome breath brushing against my face as I tried to shrink in on myself. I am fucked, it's over. Time ceased to have meaning as the figure finally stood before me. I could feel its gaze bore into my very soul, devouring any remnants of courage or hope that remained. The air grew heavy with anticipation, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for the impending doom that hung in the balance. With a chilling whisper, the figure finally spoke, its voice a haunting symphony of despair, but also something else I couldn't place at the time. I'm truly sorry for what you will experience, it hissed, with nothing but sincerity and understanding on its ghastly countenance. Just as soon as I was sure this lifetime was over for me, it was gone. 1 second I'm looking right into its eyes, and the next nothing. All the lights are on, there's sound coming from the TV in the living room. What do you want for supper? My grandmother called. She hadn't experienced anything similar to what I had. Okay, it owned a consciousness, and not just the evil of an unknown world that I first imagined. Questions raced through my mind, but answers eluded them. What was this entity? A spirit? A demon? Something far more sinister from the depths of a Lovecraftian nightmare? Was it even real? Did I truly see such a terrifying apparition? Doubt gnawed at my sanity, but the lingering fear in my heart spoke volumes. I was not alone in the house. Something supernatural had crossed my path. With no plan in place, I grappled with the overwhelming uncertainty of how to protect myself from an entity so enigmatic and powerful. The fear of the unknown gripped them tightly, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. In the aftermath of this haunting encounter, I was forever changed. The memory of that shadow figure continues to haunt my thoughts, a constant reminder of the existence of forces beyond comprehension. For in the realm of the supernatural, where shadows dance and nightmares take form, the line between reality and the unknown blurs. And in the face of such horrors, all one can do is confront their fears, seek solace in the light, and hope to never again be left alone with the terrors that lurk in the darkness. If only I could be so lucky. What the fuck am I supposed to do? Does anyone have any ideas? And what did it mean? Help. Please? I don't know how I know if it's some divine intuition or a gift of foresight, but I know that it will be back.